This will be Wouter, a more conceptual talk, which I'm really looking forward to, called Fair, Fairer, Fairest, an overview of data maturity.
Thank you, Felix. And let me quickly check a bit of the sound. Yep. Thank you all for being here and overcoming the challenge of the background noise. Yeah, I want to have a talk about fair, fairer, and fairest, about fair maturity. And let me first give an introduction of myself. My name is Wouter Franke from the Hyve, and we're an organization in the Netherlands that really works to enable open science, really working in between data itself and research and scientists to get the most value out of data by means of engineering, modeling, of the more consultancy type of services. And we do that both for a lot with open source software within research collaborations, health data networks, and also within partner communities. So a lot of it is also pre-competitive or at least in a joint setting. And let's start with the FAIR principles, and I'm not going to list them again because in these kind of days you probably see them 4, 5, 6 times. And we all have been playing around with them, working with them. We all they've been around for quite some time. Now we're starting to implement them. And the goal of it is obviously to make data accessible, data understandable for both humans and machines. But I would argue mainly machines. And I think if you talk about fair, one of the nice things, a lot of it is at semantics. But if something is a bit of an ambiguous concept, it seems to be fair sometimes. People mean a lot of different things. One of the earlier speakers spoke about the bark, the bet, and the bank. I think fair is a nice example of having double or multiple meanings as well. Principles, conceptual framework, they are related, but might not necessarily be similar. And I do think that is one of the elements where fair maturity might actually come in. So automatically, when we're talking about fair, the question arises, how do we do this? There are principles, how do we implement in practice? And we see some great examples during the day, during the years. But quickly, people also started talking about what are the best practices. So if we do this, what should be our approach? What kind of tools should we be using? What is the most important? Where do we start? And automatically also, can I check that I'm doing the right things? And maybe can someone actually check this for me? Up until, can I get certified fair? And that is actually where fair maturity models come into place. And I'm highlighting here 3 of them. There might be multiple maturity models. There might be more maturity models that people are using internally within organizations. But these 3 are more out there. It's one of the research data lines. It can be found on Zenodo, as you see, and it's later adopted by FAIRest as well. We've got the FAIR Plus one, which is the dataset maturity dataset maturity model that also goes into the maturity of FAIR. And another important one are FAIR metrics. It's a little bit more technical one, but it also really describes how a fair data set should look like. And what they all have in common is that they all focus on a couple of things. They focus on the data. They focus on persistent identifiers. This is an example that Felix also gave, for example, within Roche. Persistent identifiers, everyone seems to have a consensus. It's important for anything that is fair. It talks about the availability and accessibility of metadata. Can you actually understand, or can you get some meaningful understanding of the data set based on the metadata? And like I said, the more technical approach, if I click or if I follow this persistent identifier, does it actually resolve? Do I find something useful again? The maturity models also look into specific metadata. So if you're talking about FAIR and the principles, there are things around accessibility. So again, these maturity models check, does the metadata include anything about accessibility, the protocols, the conditions on which you access data, But it also, for example, looks if, hey, is there anything where I mentioned what happens to the data when what happens to the metadata when the data is deleted? So how persistent is the data itself? They focus on vocabularies, terminologies. Are we using controlled vocabularies? And even up till the point saying, hey, and the vocabulary that you're using, is that vocabulary fair as well? Because otherwise, we get more or less stuck, or a machine gets stuck at the next level. And things around, is there a data model? Is there an ontology being used? But as you can see, they all relatively focus a lot on the data itself. The good thing I really think about all of these models is they see maturity, fair maturity, as a bit of the continuum. It's not a black and white. Either day one you're not fair, and at day two suddenly you're completely fair. No, it's really saying, hey, now you get 2 stars on a specific principle, and you might grow up until 4 stars or whatever. So it's not a binary answer. It's really that continuum that makes it well, easier to use at least. So these maturity models have also been implemented. Some in different ways. So there are a lot of different maturity tools, and I probably won't have listed them all again. So if you have any really beautiful examples of maturity tools, please let me know after the talk. Some of them from the Australian Research Data Commons, the Fair Data Assessment Tool. It's more of a questionnaire where you go through, where you answer saying, hey, what kind of metadata do you have? What kind of data do you have in place? And provide you with a feedback in terms of how fair is your data assessed. There is the fully automated Fair Data Assessment Tool. It's another one, Fair Checker. It's not as much. It's well, it is a bit less on the graphics, but it's a nice tool as well. And Fair Evaluation Services, which is maybe the most elaborate of the 4 of them, but also again the hardest to use. And what we've done, we've created a bit of an overview of the different tools, and you see they all focus again on that metadata level. And look at the data itself. Let's see if we can get to the next slide again. Yep, there we go. I didn't list the tables here. That completely starts being unreadable, but if you really want to find read the full article, you can just follow the link. They all differentiate between metadata and data in terms of, see that a different concept, look on how you deal with that. Some of them are automated. So some of them, like I said, are just a questionnaire. Some really help you saying, hey, provide me with a link to your data, and I start automatically exploring your data. If that happens, they all rely on linked data, RDF, so that automatically pushes you with it towards a best practice or almost a standard. The recommendations are relatively sparse. So they all help you assess fairness, but they won't recommend saying, hey, this is a way of actually to move forward if you want to make your data more fair. They just say you get 2 stars out of 5, and you have to interpret it yourself, or you have to make the decision yourself. What can I actually do with that, and how would I be improving my data? One of the good things, or maybe slightly good things, they're all work in progress. So they're all continuously being developed, as also obviously our understanding, our approaches to FAIR develop. They all are still on the work in progress and continue to be improved. And if you ever want to use one, it's really thinking about where do I want to use it for, what's the scope of my assessment that I want to do on my own data, but also the amount of knowledge it actually requires. Because like I said, for example, the one on the most right here, the Fair Evaluation Services, has the most extensive way of checking your data. It can be extended as well, but it requires more knowledge about FAIR, about semantic web, about how you can actually check these kind of things. That's all nice. Fair maturity models, fair maturity assessment tools. But why do we care about fair maturity? And why should we care as a group, as an industry, about fair maturity? And I think you can look at from different perspectives. It might have started more in the academical world. So think about funders I have this large European project. I'm happy for your university to start doing the work, but one of my requirements is that you make your data fair. And that automatically raises the question for the funders, but if I ask other people to be fair, do I need to check anything, or can I just say, yep, I'm fair and that's it? So from a vendor perspective, it makes sense to have some kind of way to assess, is something fair? From the scientist point of view, I mean, it's the little bit more cynical view. I have to be fair from my research organization or from my grant, so I'll go through the steps to be fair. On the other hand, a lot of scientists obviously believe also in the value, in the benefits of fair, and they really want to be fair for themselves. But again, might need some guidance on what do I need to do for that, when am I fair, so other people can also start reusing my data. From an organizational perspective, I think it was you, Felix, that showed the slide. We're spending or we're losing 10.2 billion euros or dollars, not sure if I got that, because we're not doing fair enough. So there's, from an organization point of view, there's an efficiency, or there's a return on investment, even if you want to call it. But again, from an organization point of view, can I measure that? Can I follow that? Do I know when we are fair enough? So again, there's a need to have some kind of model or some kind of assessment. Engineering, how do I support it? How do I support any research, any organization who wants to be fair? And the regulator perspective, slightly comparable to the funder's perspective. At some point, I might actually want to ask organizations to show that they're doing their research fair, so I can actually trust outcomes, so I know I have some kind of quality assurance as well, what it is. And a fair maturity model should be about not reinventing the wheel every time, because, well, it doesn't make sense if you have different models for a scientist compared to an engineer or compared to a funder. And I think it also helps us understand what fair is and what fair isn't and how we should deal with it. And then to take a step back and look at the principles, the models that I showed, the tooling that there is, I think there's one important lesson there. Fair are principles, they are not a standard. So any model or any way of a checking tool, it's hard to actually create them, because the FAIR principles, they form guidelines, inspirations, context, they're not ready to use tooling, and there's no defined implementation of FAIR. Makes it already harder to check. The other element is FAIR, or the principles have a lot of social elements in there as well. If you take one of the principles, data are described with rich metadata. If I'm a machine, it's hard for me to judge richness. How do we compare poor versus rich? When is it rich enough? And it's similar for metadata, for example. Metadata meet domain relevant community standards. Again, as an assessment tool or as a maturity model, how do I check relevant community standards? So it already pushes you towards some kind of flexibility, some kind of more abstract framework than a complete ready-to-use tool. And I think the last one, metadata accessible, for example, even when the data are no longer available. For how long? Forever? For 7 years? You see again, there's some community standard, there's some social contracts more or less that you define together instead of being a standard. So maturity in FAIR is more than a technical solution. And maybe one last one, and it's not on the slide, but it's an important one. FAIR is not it's not equal in terms of within FAIR, within implementing FAIR, benefits and costs might be unequally distributed. Someone might need to do all the work, or a lot of the work, and someone else might actually reap most of the benefits. So that already makes it a bit more complex to think of it from a technical solution or a one perspective of how do I measure matureness. So how would my favorite model look like in terms of FAIR maturity? I think there are three elements that need to come together. It's the why. And the why is in terms of FAIR, like I said, it's more of a continuum about fairness. For my organization, would it be worthwhile to go all the way with all of the associated costs of it? Or does it make sense to go only out to a specific level and stop there because I got the most benefits in terms of the in relation to the costs. So the why should be defined in terms of which level do I need to attain at some point. So now we've got the what, the criteria. Any maturity model should have some way of actually measuring. So it can't be just a description, a story. There needs to be some qualitative or quantitative elements in there so I can actually measure my fairness. And it needs a bit of the how. So how can I change it? How can I achieve that? What kind of things do I need to implement within my organization to actually make sure that I reach a maturity model? And in my mind, that's might result into an industry standard where we can all say, hey, this is how we look to fair maturity. This is what we see fair and valuable. This is what we find less valuable, and this is how we deal with it. And there's some great initiatives. I already showed a couple of them that have been done in the past, and I think they're great in terms of inspiration, but they're not there yet. There's some great work being done in, for example, the Bestoya Alliance around fair maturity. And I'm also very curious if there's anyone who here is working on any maturity model or knows about other maturity models. Let me know, because I do believe there's that we can still need to do some work together. And I still have, are there any questions?
First, thanks a lot for your interesting talk. Yeah. In case you have any question, please line up behind the mic. Meanwhile, yeah, please go. Meanwhile, I have a question actually on after the assessment is done, right?
Yes.
Do you have any best practices of? I mean, that there's some data generated out of that. Do you have any best practices on how to what to make with that results? So to publicize it, to make the most out of it.
In terms of the result of the assessment tools?
Yes. Yeah.
At the moment, like I said, the assessment tools don't give any recommendations on how to progress, how to improve your data. I do believe that would be a nice, interesting next step for these toolings. I do believe that it would be interesting to see if a data set is open or could even be closed, to share these results and discuss them, because it might actually lead to improvements to any of these kind of tools and also the model behind it.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Joseph from Ostus. I have one maybe a little bit provocative question, and this question is, you said the why, what, and how. Maybe we should also ask the question if, because verification is very, very expensive. And somehow we need to look at the trade-off. Okay, is it really worthwhile to verify all of our data, or should we look into which data are really worth it to be verified and which we should not do it, right? Are you of the same opinion, or how do you see that?
Absolutely. I mean, the why in there is also to judge for yourself. Is it worthwhile for me to actually start verifying the data? What do I want to do with that? So there needs to be some kind of goal with verification as well. And that should in the end match your the effort you put in it. And like I said, it's not equal, So especially around fair, if you start looking bigger and bigger, it's not just your own silo, it's not just your own organization. You start to think industry-wide or between organizations, and then again it starts harder. But there's definitely what do I want to achieve with it, and how far do I need to go in verification of my data, or do I need to do it at all?
You also?
Thanks, Wouter. Great, really great talk. I like the part about the social contract that you mentioned. It's also from experience. Just a question, do you have already, or have you started thinking about any objective metrics about finding the sweet spot between value brought by fair and the effort invested in fair? There's something like, yeah.
In terms of the metrics in the end around what kind of things do you do, I think it's going to be a match between the more technical ones, and they might already exist in a lot of the work that has been done, but they need to be augmented with more organizational aspects of how do you sustain an organization of being fair? What kind of processes do you need to have in place? Do you need to have kind of strategy which is company-wide, because it's not a technical solution itself? And obviously they're going to be slightly harder to quantify, saying, hey, when is that enough? What's the indicator there? in my mind, you could start thinking about time. How long have you been involved? And how deeply is it rooted within the organization? But again, there will be more qualitative than real quantitative.
Okay, then thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
So